All right. Well, thanks, guys. Those of you that are hopping on, we're going to get started here in just a moment. High altitude home buying class. Just a couple housekeeping items, if you don't mind, just make sure you're on mute. And I can't promise that my dog who is sleeping in my office doesn't bark in his sleep or make any noises, but we are happy to have you guys all here. So we're going to get started in just a moment. See if we've got any other folks that are going to join here in just a minute. So this is High Altitude Home Buying, and I'm your host, and so is Amy Nakos, my good friend and colleague, and we'll get started here in just a second. Well, it's about the top of the hour. Amy, you want to go ahead and get rolling?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So today we are here with High Altitude Home Buying. So thank you all for joining. Just a couple housekeeping items. If you don't mind, make sure you're on mute. And we are recording this session, so we'll send it to you afterwards in case you have a friend or a family member that might want to see this, and you can share it with that person as well. So thanks for being here today. Again, we are going to cover strategies for Colorado mountain living, buying and living and owning homes in the foothills, and also Summit County, which is more resort focused, which is where Amy is based out of. So who are our presenters? We may know some of you guys already, but we'll introduce ourselves here. So Amy, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Awesome, Jackie, you're letting me go first. So I've been in the real estate profession since 2002 and have been a Summit County Realtor since 2004. So I'm going on almost 20 years up here. I'm also a licensed Colorado attorney, which is good and bad, I suppose. If you love attorneys, then you'll love me. I tell people I'm an attorney on the weekdays. I don't really practice law anymore, but I do keep my law license. I live full-time in Frisco, Colorado, and I've lived up in Summit County since 2003, so almost 20 years in the mountains. So today I want to talk with you about what it's like to actually live and own real estate in the High Rockies. So my business is based in Summit County, which is Breckenridge, Frisco, Keystone, Dillon, Silverthorne. I've also done some development work with my husband. You'll see a picture of him there. And we have a second home in Denver. So we're a little bit of the reverse of many of my clients. And that's because my husband does a lot of business down in Denver. So that's me.
Great. Well, I am Jackie White. And I know sometimes people think about realtors wearing power suits. I am not today. I pulled out my The Mountains Are Calling t-shirts for our class. I don't know if it's reversed in the camera, but I am a mountain realtor for sure. So I work in the Denver metro area, but I live in the foothills in Conifer. I've been here since 2007, moved to Colorado via the Northeast, and I've got 2 kids that keep me super busy. And we actually own property in Keystone. So we're up there quite a bit in the wintertime. Both my kids compete in moguls, and so we really enjoy being in A-Basin. And I say I'm a pretty decent skier, but I'm an expert après skier. So I used to be in marketing. I worked for a number of marketing firms kind of across the country before I landed here in Colorado, and I've been in real estate for about a decade. Started out as an investor, purchasing properties in Denver, got licensed in 2014, and I do specialize in the Front Range foothills. So about a half an hour drive west of downtown Denver, and the communities primarily in Jefferson County of Evergreen, Conifer, along that 285 corridor, Pine, Bailey, Indian Hills, all that area. So kind of where I like to get my business done and work with clients, help them move to the mountains and make that dream a reality. So we're going to cover a few things here today. And, at the end, we'll leave some time open for questions as well. But we're going to cover, what the difference is living in the Front Range foothills. And when we say Front Range, we're talking about just outside Denver versus the Central Rockies, which is where Amy is focused. And what is it like living in the mountains full time versus having, a resort or a second home? And there's some pros and cons, things you have to think about when you're buying a mountain house. And, home inspection considerations too, because, mountain properties are different compared to stuff down in town, down in the city. So if you look at this map here of Colorado, I'm kind of focused up here a little bit closer to Denver, kind of the Front Range foothills. And then Amy is a little bit further west, more Summit County area. So Amy, we've got a lot of those, resort communities up there, like what, Copper, Breck, what else, what kind of areas are you in?
So I cover the area that has Copper Mountain, Breckenridge, and Keystone, and along with the ski resort A Basin, but A Basin doesn't have real estate in it. So those are the four main, or the four world-class ski resorts in my community. And so you know where the interstate goes down a little bit at that little V, that's Copper Mountain. Nope.
Oh, right here. That's right.
There,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. And you got Dillon and Frisco. Those are great full-time towns too.
And Silverthorne. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the Front Range foothills. So a lot of people think about Evergreen and Conifer, and those are communities that are basically commutable to Denver. We got a lot of folks that are up here in the foothills. You know, the elevation's about 7,500. We're just a little bit higher than Denver. So we get a little bit more snow than maybe downtown Denver or some of the suburbs down there. But we've got some great amenities and activities that are here in the foothills. So, you know, we've got Evergreen Lake. There's always activities and concerts, things happening there in the wintertime as well, such as the celebration around Christmas and the parade, and you know, ice skating activities on the lake. We've got Staunton State Park, which is celebrating actually just their 10th anniversary last weekend. It's a beautiful place to hike. So there's a lot of activities that are happening here just within, you know, a half an hour drive of downtown. What I love about living in the foothills, and I've been here over 15 years, is just all the outdoor stuff that we can do. So you have really easy access to tons of hiking. There's lots of Jefferson County open space parks where you can go mountain biking and enjoy the weather outdoors all year long. You know, snowshoeing's not quite as prevalent, you know, probably a little bit more where Amy's located because we're on lower elevation. So we don't get as much of that snow that stays for as long. But just being able to camp, go fly fishing in the Platte River. Red Rocks is 15 minutes from my house, which is great. We have so many awesome performances, and I feel like every season they extend it even longer. They're almost practically year round. Tons of great performers and easy to get to all the stuff that's happening downtown. If you want to go out to eat, if you want to see a professional sports. I'm looking forward to the Nuggets and their recent win and what they're doing here in Colorado with the NBA playoffs. So lots of opportunities here in Denver as a city, but then also enjoying mountain living and not too far of a drive. So Amy, you cover Summit County. Tell us a little bit more about the flavor over there.
I would love to tell you about the flavor. I want to take a step back. You know, Jackie and I were talking about what should we do for this webinar? And I said, I get the question all the time from people, and usually it's people moving to Colorado. So they're from out of state and they're moving in and they're saying, so what's the difference between, like, should I live in Golden or should I live in Breckenridge? And I think, oh, that's such an interesting question, right? And there's a lot of different considerations which launched this conversation. But let's talk about Summit County and the High Rockies. So we're about an hour 15 outside of central Denver. So everybody drives through I-70, through Evergreen, Conifer, where Jackie works. And when you get through the Eisenhower Tunnel and come down, you're in Summit County. We are at about 9,000 feet altitude, and we are in the middle of the mountains with the ski resorts. So can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
I think what makes us different than Jackie's market and then the foothills is that we really are a resort market. The fun things that we have up here, and the reason people love living in Denver because they can take advantage of this area and other areas like this, is world-class ski resorts. We've got 4 of the best ski resorts in the world in this one small area where we are. So that's Keystone, A Basin, Copper, and Breckenridge.
You know, you mentioned that, Amy, in the world. And what strikes me is whenever I'm in the lift line and you hear people speaking all different languages. So, you know, we've got some awesome skiing if they're willing to travel here to come see it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a very long winters up here. So you have to be a winter resort enthusiast or winter activity enthusiast to live up here. But our golf courses are golf courses in the summer, and many of them turn into cross-country ski areas in the winter, which is very fun. So if you're a golfer and then you're out cross-country skiing, you know where you are on the holes. Cycling, both mountain biking and road cycling, we have miles and miles of paved bike paths, so nobody has to ride on the road, which is really great. It makes it safe, and people love riding road bikes on our mountain bike paths. But mountain biking, if you're a mountain biker, again, 4 world-class ski resorts, you're going to find the most incredible mountain biking. Again, you know, hiking, snowshoeing, everything you think you're doing in the mountains, but because we are a resort area and because we attract 4+ million ski visitors a year, we have infrastructure, amenities, and experiences that other towns, like our entire county is 30,000 people, but we have restaurants, amenities, and experiences that are in big cities. And that's because we are a resort community. So you're going to have amazing dining opportunities, local breweries, along with summer festivals and great concerts, which draw people from all over Colorado, really all over the nation, to come up here in the summertime.
And even people within Colorado would love coming up to Summit County, right? I mean, I'm only about an hour 15 drive to Summit County, but we're up there all the time because we have all the amenities that are available.
Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to buy in the mountains and the things that you should consider. And I'm going to jump first into what's it like to buy a house in the foothills, because, you know, for a lot of people, it might be watching this, whether it's live or later on, you see a recording. You just may not have experience of living in the mountains or a more rural area. And there's things you got to think about when it comes to buying a house. It certainly is much different from being in town or in the suburbs where you've got more of those planned developments and the housing is just a little bit different. So there's things you got to think about to make sure you're buying the right home for your family, for your daily needs, and also just the physical home itself. So for a lot of folks, they're probably used to, during buying a home, having a home inspection, right? You're going to have your home inspector come out, get on the roof, take a look at the furnace, but there's other things you have to think about in mountain properties. So like where I live in the foothills, we have a lot of wells and septic systems. So those cover your water and then also your sewage. And you've got to have those inspected because those are two major things, pieces of the house that if there's something wrong with them can be very, very costly, tens of thousands of dollars to remedy if there's an issue. So you want to have both of those inspected before closing. When you have a well, you have to think about the water usage too. Here in Colorado, water rights are a big deal. And so when you have a well, you have to consider, is it for household use only, which is just inside the house, for your drinking and cooking and laundry, doing laundry, things like that, versus a domestic well, which is where you can use it outside. And then there's different permissions when it comes to a domestic well. So is it for irrigation of a garden or a little area that you've got, plants, or is it for horses? There's various types of usage. So you've got to make sure that you are compliant with how you want to use the water. You also have to look at the well's production. So, how many gallons per minute are you getting? That's going to show you how well the well produces, how much water you're going to get. And also, the potability. So you get some water samples, you'll send that out to a lab during your inspection period. Just make sure you don't have anything, little bugs in there. And it's, sometimes it'll come up and it's easy to remedy, but it's just one of those things you want to know before you buy this house. The other thing that can happen sometimes is if you have a well that is low producing, sometimes there's what we have called storage tanks in the house. So it might be in like an unfinished part of the lower level, like in the utility room. And that's where you've got a storage tank where it's constantly drawing on the well, and then you draw off of that storage tank. So there's inspectors that kind of walk you through filtration, all this other stuff. It may sound complicated if you're just used to turning on the tap and getting city water, but this is pretty much regular living up here. And so there's a lot of experts that can help you maintain this, inspect it during your under contract process. Now, when we talk about sewage, we have septic systems. And so those are tanks where the black and gray water will collect, and then they will go through what's called a leach field, which is a series of PVC pipe underground. And you've got to have that inspected. It actually has to happen by law before closing. So typically the seller will have that pumped in and inspected, and they get what's called a use permit from the county public health department. And so, when I'm working with sellers, I always say, hey, get this done even at your first thought of selling your house, because you want to make sure there's no issues, because that can be costly, and it has to be remedied before closing. So again, another big piece that is just a little bit different up in mountains, but we do it every day. Amy and I are totally used to it. So for us, it's second nature, but it's just something different if you're used to living in the city. Another thing I want to touch on a little bit is wildfire and defensible space and insurance. So my husband and I are very involved in the fire community. My husband's a firefighter. And so we've done a lot of work with neighbors and communities and helping them become more wildfire ready. And, you have to look at that just being something that's a part of living up here. So depending on what part of the country you're in, you might already have some other thing you have to think about, maybe earthquakes or hurricanes or tornadoes, right? Like every part of the country has something different. And for us, we just have to be aware of wildfire. And we have a lot of community groups and fire departments that will help you in advising on what we call defensible space. And that's creating kind of a barrier or of protection around your house, so that there's not as much flammable material nearby. And also what we call home hardening. And that's a matter of building and using the right materials that are a little bit more resistant to fire or embers if there's a wildfire in the area. Now, because Colorado does have a higher fire danger than other parts of the country, insurance is becoming a little bit more expensive and a little bit harder to secure. So that's one of those things where it used to be, oh, it's a couple days before closing, I'm just going to call my insurance broker and make sure they switch my address to the new house, right? But now you really earlier in the process, like within the first 5 or 7 days, want to make sure you're making some phone calls, what to budget for insurance, and make sure you're getting the right carrier that can cover your costs. If there's something catastrophic, you want to make sure that you've got enough coverage that will cover the replacement or rebuild cost. And really, local insurance connections make the world of difference. People that live right in the community where you're buying, they know how to work with you and get that going, as opposed to if you just call the national 800 number for one of those big carriers too. So super important to understand what that looks like. As far as living in the foothills, I wanted to touch a little bit on what neighborhood flavor can look like too, right? Because every community is a little bit different. Your own neighborhood, what it feels like in terms of, are there lots of families, or are there more retirees, or what does that look like? Sometimes there's certain communities here in the foothills I kind of refer to as foothills light, right? So it's like an easy transition from living in the city, because maybe that community in the foothills has public sewer and water. There's neighborhoods in Evergreen that have that. Conifer has a similar 1 or 2 neighborhoods that are specific. So it's one less thing you have to think about, no well or septic, right? Things you have to also think about is what is the access to a major road? How long does it take you to get from your house to I-70 or 285 or 470, so that you can get down to Denver or further up and see Amy up in Summit County. So as a crow flies, it may not look real far, but you could be on a windy road, behind someone that's biking, or you could be, on a snowy road and it's a little icy. So you have to think about, what is that drive time going to look like? We have larger parcels of land in some of these neighborhoods, 2, 3, 4, 10 acres, compared to maybe the resort community where you get more condensed living. I know Amy's going to touch on that later. And we do have a lot more primary occupant homeowners here. So these are people that are rooted in the community. They might have kids that go to school here. They work in the area. They're volunteering and they're active in their community. So it's a little bit more rooted because people are here full time. You get to know your neighbors. You get to have, a group of friends. So it's going to be a little bit different than perhaps in a resort community. So go ahead, Amy.
Jackie, that was great. That was great. I'm going to reiterate some of the things you said, because you did a great job covering the well and septic and the wildfire. So let's just move on to the next slide so I can follow along. All right, resort community. So the first thing I want to mention about Summit County is that our geographical landscape is about 75% national forest. So most of our land is owned by the United States government and can't be built on. So we're like a little island, if you will, in the middle of the mountains. Some things that to think about when you're living in the resort is tourists. About 1 in 4 of our properties are occupied by somebody full-time. That means 75% of our properties are not full-time residents. And that's an average. It's going to vary greatly on the neighborhood you're in. So we have tourists in town. We have a lot more traffic. You may have people staying in homes near you, next to you, that are short-term renters. They're here visiting for a week. So what we do as locals, and if you are thinking about living up here, we go to grocery stores and to restaurants, and we ski and we hike on off times. And that's because we know how to avoid the large crowds. And if you are going into the large crowd, it's fine. You just know what you're getting into. We do have on and off seasons too, big holiday weekends, such as Christmas, New Year's, pretty much the month of March with spring break is when it gets really busy. And maybe that's the time we travel and go somewhere else. And then it's really slow right now. We're in what's called mud season. So once the resorts close, up until summertime activities, it's mud season. Now, all the snow is melted off the ground in our towns right now, but we still have a lot of snow on the mountains. So it's a little hard to hike. So it's a season where it's not where the activities may be a little bit less. But anyway, that's consideration number one. You will be living with tourists. Next page, short-term rentals. I touched on this. We have a landscape of ever-changing regulations with short-term rentals. And I've written a number of articles on this. You can find them on my website if you want to really dig deep into where you can rent and what that looks like. But most of the new regulations have happened in about the last year. And so it's different than it used to be. What we used to find is that properties could just get a short-term rental license. Even before licenses weren't required, people would just short-term rent their property when they weren't using it. That's not the case anymore. There's certain areas where that can happen, mostly in resort, but there's many areas where that cannot happen now. So if you are thinking about buying a place in the mountains and you want to use it as a short-term rental, so it's your second vacation home, it's great to work with a local realtor, and it's great to actually investigate the different rules in the 6 different jurisdictions that govern it. Wear and tear. Most of my clients are second homeowners, right? I already said that 1 in 4 properties are occupied. So I work with some full-time locals. We have very different considerations than I have when I'm working with second home buyers. But if you are a second homeowner, and Jackie's one of these, and Jackie has a condo in Keystone and she rents it out short-term here and there, you have to be prepared for the wear and tear on your unit and be okay and budget for what it's going to take to spruce it back up when it's needed. Return on short-term rental versus long-term investments. Really the demographic of people who want to buy up here. Many people are from Denver and they want to use their property for fun and their family and skiing and biking and going to the summer events, and then rent it out short-term when they're not using it. So that's kind of the demographic we see. Long-term rentals are in high demand and you can rent it out long-term. It would just mean that you wouldn't have use of the property during that time. And to just quickly define short-term and long-term, a short-term rental is anything less than 30 days. So for instance, and I think Jackie does this and can speak to it, is she can rent out her condo for 6 months of the summer when she's not going to use it. And then in the winter, be able to use it for her and her family and rent it out short-term otherwise. And she's in an area that doesn't have short-term rental restrictions. But that's something that you can think about. There's different rental opportunities for your properties up here because of the high demand. So that makes it, a valuable asset that you can use in different ways. And yes, real estate always has great tax write-offs. So, you'll want to always check with your CPA, but we, not only would you get the mortgage interest deduction, but tax write-offs for household goods for your rental.
You mentioned the rental piece, and we've got our condo in Keystone, and we also have long-term rentals in Denver. And you have to think about, sometimes I know early on I was doing analysis paralysis, looking at the numbers. It's like, well, this money would work so much harder in Denver for me, but I had someone tell me, Jackie, there's no return on investment for your happiness and the memories and the things that you can do too. So think about that when it comes to your own use and having that place. With our kids skiing every weekend, gosh, it is so nice to just go up on Friday and I have to fight the traffic and just come back whenever we please on a Sunday, kind of judge what's happening with the traffic. I think also too, it's so important to have a really great property manager in Summit County. So even though I've got properties here in Denver that I have managed, for some reason I had to part way with my manager, I can keep an eye on what I've got here until I find a new one. But in Summit County, you've got to have a really great property manager because, I'm not driving up there to change the bed sheets and clean the toilets in between each guest, right? So it's really important that you have like a good cleaner and a good property manager and someone that's marketing the property to help you get, the maximum income that you can when you're not using it, just to kind of offset those expenses. So having a good relationship with a property manager is key. And I know Amy knows a bunch of folks up there and she can refer you to the right partners to make sure it's a success.
Yeah, I have a bunch on my website. There's a lot of property managers, many, many great ones. And I often refer based upon where the property is located because you will get some local expertise depending upon where your property is located. And I mean, just, and to zoom out a little bit, the conversation, many of you listening might have this experience, but maybe you just moved to Denver, maybe you just got into skiing, maybe you're just starting to explore the mountains, but the conversation of getting a second home up here really starts with the experience of I-70. Because if I-70 were easy, I don't think as many people would feel like they needed to have a place up here, but it can be really difficult. The traffic can be difficult, the weather, we always have weather considerations up here. So that's the start. That's where people start to think about it, to say, wow, it really would be nice to not have to drive home. I could stay at my own place. What do the numbers look like? And I have many conversations that begin with that. So it's just, it's just far enough on a busy road with high demand that it creates a level of demand for our properties up here.
Totally. Yeah. And it's so often on a Sunday, we look at when the kids are done skiing at 2, do we leave now? Or do we come back and we just chill and we have dinner and watch a little football and leave at 7 o'clock? And we would have gotten home at the same time as if we left at 3, because we're avoiding all that traffic and we're just getting at the tail end of it and going straight home. So it's so nice to have that flexibility, right?
It is. And if you're in a rental, your checkout time was 10 a.m. So you'd almost have to buy the next night, even though you're leaving. So that's another thing I'll bring up real quick. I've had a number of people decide not to buy up here. And instead they're just like, I'm just going to rent places. I'm going to use my money to work for me in a different way, as opposed to a mountain property. But instead, I'm just going to rent every weekend, and that's someone's prerogative too. Everybody's finances are different. But I can speak about this later just in terms of appreciation, but most people who buy up here have had great returns on their investment on the appreciation side.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Types of housing available. Again, we are a little landlocked island. So you have to remember that there's not new tracts of development. There's not areas where we can build hundreds of homes. You will see that in Grand County, up in near Winter Park, Fraser, Granby. They have a lot more land, so there's more development there. Summit County does not. You're going to see smaller projects and you're going to see scrapes in order to see new development. And a lot of the new development we have going on right now in Silverthorne and Keystone are condos. So that's great, but if you're looking for single family homes, it's really only Summit Sky Ranch, which is north of Silverthorne, where we're seeing a large tract of land that are building single family homes. So like I mentioned before, far less owner occupied homes. We have about 35,000 properties in all of Summit County with a full-time resident base of 30,000 people. And it's not one local per one house. That 30,000 people are occupying probably about 1/4 of the 35,000 total properties we have. You're going to see that we have a lot more multifamily homes than the suburbs, a lot more condos, townhomes, and that's because we have higher density and higher zoning closer to the resorts and closer to the main streets of our towns. Parking ends up being a huge issue. Parking is one of the main things to consider when you're getting a place up here. Some places have surface parking without storage. So you have to think, gosh, I was going to bring my bike and my kayak and my cooler and my burley and all this stuff. And so you have to decide if the storage and having your stuff up here is going to be an important consideration for you. And if it is, you're going to have to look for that property type. And garages are at a premium. You know, they do make the properties definitely more expensive. When I adjust for garages, it's $75,000 a space.
Wow.
So, yeah. You are going to see that we're more expensive per square foot than the Foothills in Denver. I was just running some numbers. Our average price per square foot up here is probably in the 800s.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And it depends on, obviously different neighborhoods will have different pricing. And the age of the property will have different pricing, and the size of the property will have different price per square foot. But if you're thinking, gosh, I want 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom, and you say 800 per square foot, that's about 800,000. And that's probably about right. So be prepared for much higher pricing up here. And really it's a question of supply and demand. Jackie, I don't know how many sales you have in your market a year, but in all of Summit County, we'll have about 2,000 total sales in an entire year.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, there's times where, you know, we'll have a few dozen homes on the market and like the thin times of year, and then it'll go up to maybe 80 to 100. But that's across from I-70 to 470, 285, all the way out to Pine, you know, Park County area. So, you know, the supply and demand is certainly an issue with us too, because everybody thinks about moving to Colorado and they envision the mountains. They're not thinking about, you know, flat land, being in the city. They want to be here to be active. And so there is a big demand in the Foothills for sure. You know, a lot of times I think of it as like beachfront property, right? Like if you're moving to Florida or you're moving to somewhere that's warm, you want to be close to the water. Same thing with the mountains, right? And our price per square foot is much lower than where you are at $400 a square foot. So you're going to get a little bit more breathing room, elbow room between you and your neighbors. And you've got to think about what is it you're looking for, because, you know, where Amy is, she's probably right out the door and skiing in 10 minutes. Like I will drive up there, but then I'll be set up for the weekend with my condo. So, you know, you've got to consider what is your lifestyle and what are you looking for every day?
Yeah. And Jackie, when we originally talked about doing this, this webinar too, we talked about people who were moving here from out of state. And so I get a lot of people who are retirees, and we'll talk about, you know, and for them, I have conversations with them about, okay, is it more important for you to be really close to skiing, or do you need to be by the airport for some reason? Is altitude a consideration? I mean, you're at 7,000 feet. I'm at 9,000. It's a huge difference in terms of health and, you know, what people can sustain in terms of, you know, their well-being. So these are all the different considerations. And then ultimately, if that's you and you're thinking about, gosh, I want to move to Colorado and I want to live in the mountain lifestyle, you end up flying out here and you get in a car and you meet with Jackie and she's going to drive you around, and then you meet with me and I'm going to drive you around, and you're going to figure out where you want to be and the lifestyle that you want. You know, whether you want to have the space and live in the foothills and have access to both city and mountain life, or whether you're willing to go an extra 45 minutes and live in the middle of the resort area. And I do want to clarify too, I mean, we do have resorts, but we also have communities that aren't full resort areas like Frisco and Silverthorne and Dillon and areas of Breckenridge. So we do have beautiful communities where you don't have to feel like you're in the middle of everyone's ski vacation.
So I have a question for you. When you have people that are from Denver, because I think it's more extreme if you're going from Denver to Summit County as opposed to like Denver to, you know, Conifer.
Yeah. Oh, Jackie,
full-time. Like, what do they notice first?
Can you repeat the question? Your internet froze.
Oh, okay. So if you've got folks that are moving from Denver up to Summit County, what is the biggest thing that they notice?
That's the price.
Oh, and they were up there periodically and now they're there full time.
I mean, the first thing that they notice is the price. You know, some sticker shock for sure. That's number one. I think number two, the main thing that they notice is the weather, because there's almost always about a 20-degree temperature swing from Denver to Summit. So you can guarantee that Summit will be 20 degrees colder. I've experienced it where it's the reverse, right? Where some it's warmer than Denver when we have an inversion, but I've also experienced a 60-degree temperature swing where it's beautiful in Denver and it's snowing. So the weather is something that it's very different. And one thing I tell people is you have to realize when you live in the mountains, your snow doesn't melt for the entire winter. If you're in Denver, it snows and it melts. Ours just keeps piling up. So if you think about that, you think about, wow, you really cannot escape from the snow and the snow removal and that. I think on the positive side, what people find is maybe a little bit more laid back atmosphere where people don't ask you what you do for a living. They ask, do you ski or snowboard? Do you mountain bike or do you road bike?
That's awesome. So you can tell what the priorities are, right? It's lifestyle versus work.
It really is. So the vibe is very different here. The other thing you'll find too is, for instance, our schools, we have 6 elementary schools, and then we have 1 middle school and 1 high school. So all the kids in the entire community collect in 1 school for middle school and high school. And in a way, it's like, it's a beautiful situation where you have people from all over, all different demographics, all different socioeconomics, speaking different languages, and they're all in one place together. And that really is the demographic of our community. Whereas if you're in a larger metropolitan area, you're going to be surrounded more, with people who are just like you. And it is a small town. Like I said, 30,000 people in our entire county. I think Frisco has a population of, I think 2,500 or 5,000. I should know this. I live there, but just you have that small town feeling, which is a beautiful change from the city. So there's the good and bad.
It's funny you mentioned the weather. It made me think about, I get a lot of folks moving here from Texas or warmer climates, and they say, how come the house doesn't have air conditioning, right? And I probably have only been in, honestly, a handful of houses with air conditioning, because even in the Evergreen Conifer area, we are usually 8 to 10 degrees cooler than Denver, especially in the summertime, which is great. I mean, whenever we are driving back up the hill from Denver in the summertime, it's like, okay, what's the temperature going to be when we get home? And it cools off at night. It's great sleeping weather. So like air conditioning is not even a thought. It's funny. So,
well, we have no air conditioning up here unless it's commercial properties. So yeah, people ask that a lot. Which I think just in terms of your home too, another thing people don't think about, people are used to gas force air and gas forced heat, because that same vent system will get you both the hot and the cold. But in the mountains, since we don't have air conditioning, we have a lot of in-floor radiant heat that actually heats our properties. So it's just a different thing to consider.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's talk about HOAs. I know you deal with this a lot more than I do when it comes to, condos and townhomes.
Sure. Well, if you're looking for a second home and you are getting a condo in a resort area, you are going to have a homeowners association. A lot of people don't like homeowners associations, but I think they have a lot of benefits, especially in the mountains. So when looking at homeowners associations, and let me just bring up too, we have all different property types in Summit. We have single family homes on well and septic. We have single family homes on public water. We have duplexes. We have townhomes. And then we have a lot of big condo complexes, and many of you are probably familiar with those because they're by the ski resorts. So you've seen them. So I'm just going to talk about homeowners associations, and this is going to mainly apply to the large condo complexes. You're going to first want to check not only the short-term rental rules for where the property is located in that jurisdiction, but the condo association might have their own short-term rental rules. There's a few up here that do that. They tend to not be at resorts. The resorts want as many short-term rental opportunities for people. You're going to find short-term rental restrictions further out of town. They can be pricey. I mean, if you are in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo in Keystone, you're going to want to be paying at least $600 or $700 a month to know that all the expenses are being covered. There's also usually resort fees on top of the HOA fees. So the HOA will be the building yourself, and then the resort fees are going to be for the resort association that manages the walkways and the trash cans and the events at the resort. So just note that you might have 2 separate HOAs you're going to want to look, and this is an individual case-by-case basis when you're getting into your due diligence for your purchase, you're going to want to look at how financially solvent the HOA is, what their reserves are. Look at the capital reserve study. Are they planning for the new roof? Are they planning for the exterior paint? And make sure that they are. What I have found in the mountains is we tend to have very well-managed HOAs, and that's because they've been around for a while, and you have good, competent property managers and great people on the board. You have to imagine that these second homeowners who come often from corporate industry or real estate backgrounds or from whatever, they're smart, they're savvy, they volunteer to be on their HOA board, and they do a good job making sure that the property is managed and not being run into the ground. Is there any drama with the HOA board? Could be. Is there any drama with somebody in the building? Could be. That's where you should read the meeting minutes, and then you're just going to get a history of what's been going on in the project. And the property management company is also an important factor. Some other things to look for within the HOAs is the insurance piece. Jackie mentioned before, it's getting more difficult and more expensive to get insurance for these large projects. So we're seeing some special assessments happening just to get insurance coverage, and communities who are having to figure out, how can we get this price down? Do we have to add sprinkler systems? Do we have to get more defensible space? What does it look like to get insurance to cover our whole project? So that's something you're going to want to look out for. And as I mentioned before, with the snow, one of the largest line items is just going to be snow removal. Just know that that's going to happen. One other thing, and a great thing about HOAs is so many of these projects have actually gone out and negotiated contracts for cable, internet, Wi-Fi, trash, all of those things. It is part of your HOA dues, so you don't have to often pay for anything other than your HOA dues. Sometimes maybe electric.
Yeah, I mean, my property management fee is about $400 a month, and then we pay like $35 for electric, and that's it. Covers everything else.
Mm-hmm.
The pool maintenance, the snow removal, the internet, all the stuff that you talk about.
And you have an indoor pool and a hot tub.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's good. And I think Jackie's anomaly there, she has a lot of units in her building where they can spread the cost a little bit more. And she's also not in the middle of the resort. So the middle of the resort properties tend to have a little bit higher dues.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you have to walk from my unit to get to Keystone, but when you're like ski in, ski out, that's just an extra benefit. So you're going to pay a little bit more. And you're totally right. You know, as far as like the resort fees, you might be paying into that, but those are the amenities and the events that draw in the tourists. So when you're trying to rent your place out, you want to have their coming here for a reason. There's things going on. There's, you know, festivals or I don't know, whatever's happening, right? For 4th of July, there's fireworks and all the stuff that people want to come and experience. You pay that resort fee, but it's what's drawing in tourists too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So could you have the best of both worlds? Why not? Right? Yes, no, of course. You know, you could certainly look at what's it like to have a property and live full-time in the foothills, and then have maybe a second home or a condo or something that you use on the weekends. There's a lot of options there. Or, I mean, you could even do the reverse like Amy does. You know, she's up in Summit County and then comes down here for business and doing things like that. So there's lots of options to consider. And so, you know, we're happy to walk you through what that looks like. What is your lifestyle, especially if you're moving to Colorado for the first time? You know, Amy and I both know the right questions to ask to understand what are the features of the home, the community, the lifestyle that you want to have, and what's the best community. Is it looking at the foothills? Is it looking at Summit County? And then within that, what are the right neighborhoods? Do you want to be a little bit more of a hermit and a little bit more on a bigger parcel? Or do you want to be in a community that's a little bit more active? What does it look like for you? So the other thing to think about too is, you know, with Summit County, it is great to be able just to get away for the weekends, feel like you're going on vacation, but you're really not that far out of town. You know, avoiding I-70, I tell you, that's always, you need to just put a sign on the edge of I-70, Amy, because all those people in that bumper to bumper traffic, say, call Amy, you need a billboard.
Yeah, like the billboard, all the billboards at Idaho Springs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is certainly a lot of benefits to, living in both areas. And, we've both moved here from out of state. And my father was in the military. I lived all over the world. I know Amy came from, Chicago area. And I don't know about you, but this is certainly the best place I've ever lived. And I'm not planning on moving anytime soon.
Me either. I mean, living in Colorado it's a dream for many. And then when you get here, you realize how amazing it is and why you live here and why there's so many people moving here. So, yeah, let us help you think through those considerations, because there are so many different benefits to living in both places. And it really it comes down to, your lifestyle, your job, really your job. If you're still working and you don't have a job in the mountains in Summit County, that's going to be a rough commute. You're probably looking more at an investment property. If you are closer to retirement and looking for that, I work with a lot of people who say, well, I'm not ready to retire yet, but I want to buy a property. It's an investment property for me, and I'm going to move into it in my retirement. So we see a lot of that activity up here. But there's numerous considerations. I think we touched on a lot of them today. Any other thoughts, Jackie, on stuff we need to cover?
Gosh, I get a lot of people from Denver, especially over the last couple of years, who are just like, I'm done with the rat race and the traffic. I just need to slow down a little bit. I don't want to be all the way up in Summit County, but I just want to feel like I'm more of a small town community. That's where I want to raise my family, or I just want to have a little bit more privacy, a little bit bigger lot, be on an acre, not be, right next door to my neighbors. So a lot of people kind of made that lifestyle switch over the last couple of years. The one thing that we didn't touch on is wildlife and what that's like living up here in the mountains, because it's different, right? So we do have deer that are always grazing. I've got a fox that's in my neighborhood that's stealing dog toys from other yards and bringing them to my house as like an offering for my dog. I mean, we've got all sorts of fun stories. We also have bears. So, one of the things is you bring your trash can out the morning of garbage day. You don't put it out the night before, or it's going to be all the way across the neighborhood, right? So, they're not really interested in people, but it's just a nuisance, right? So you got to think about that kind of stuff. And I don't know what kind of wildlife stuff you have a lot more moose than I do. That's for sure.
We have a lot of moose. We have a lot of moose. They're sometimes just walking up and down the streets. And every moose sighting is special. You just can't believe it. Like, oh my gosh, that thing is larger than a horse and it's walking down the street. And it's wild. It's crazy. That's pretty fun. We do have a neighborhood bear. Most of our trash cans up here are bear proof. It sometimes doesn't stop the bear from trying to tip it over, but bear, and then the fox that chased the bear after it tips over the trash cans, then the fox go through and eat the food. Yeah, but we don't really have deer or elk like you do in Evergreen.
Well, the only traffic jams we have here in the foothills are created by elk. So the big herd will just be coming through and they're taking their time. So it's always funny because you'll get somewhere and be like, oh, sorry, I was late, elk traffic jam, right? And people just know. So they take their time and there's nothing you're going to do about it. It does look like a big herd of, horses or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, but it's fun. It's just kind of part of, living up here, and it's like nothing else on earth. So we enjoy it. So
very fun, very fun.
But we're here to help you out. So if you're moving here from out of state, or you're in another part of Colorado and you're thinking about living more of that mountain lifestyle, we can both be here to be a resource for you, answer questions, and make sure you're in the right spot. So any questions? Anybody have any questions? If you'd like, you're welcome to throw it in the chat, unmute yourself. We'll be here for a minute or two. If anybody wants to jump in, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, Jackie, I'll throw out while we're waiting for questions that my assistant Jennifer and I work a lot with people looking to quote unquote run the numbers. I want to see what it's going to cost me to own the condo with my rental income. And so we're definitely happy to help with that.
That's a good point too. I didn't touch on earlier is that in Jefferson County, which is, the Front Range foothills primarily, we do allow short-term rentals, but some of the key pieces are you have to have a license and you got to be on at least 1 acre of property. So that generally means most of the foothills, right? So folks down in town in Jefferson County aren't going to have a 1 acre. So it'll be mostly Evergreen Conifer. So they are kind of here or there. They are around, but not quite as prevalent as where Amy's located. So as far as the infrastructure of property managers and cleaners and all the stuff that you would expect to help out on a short-term rental. We don't get as much of that because it's not as higher density with short-term rental needs in Jefferson County. So just something to think about if you are going to get a short-term rental up here. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? Anything else you want to dive in? All right. Well, we will have this recording available. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it, whether you're on Facebook or your YouTube Live or watching us live here on Zoom. We appreciate it. Happy to be a resource for you. Have a great week and enjoy some of that Colorado sun. Bye.